All right, guys. Okay, so this is, we ended at the end of Exodus 4 last week. Two quick things before we get into anything Hebrew related, and then we'll get into the study. First of all, I did want to correct something that I said. I don't even remember exactly what week I said it, but I was talking about the alphabets and stuff like that, and one thing I said was that Ugaritic, that the writing system they used was based on cuneiform. That was a misnomer. It looks like cuneiform, but it's actually not. It's not based on it. It's still wedge-like, but the letters themselves are an early version of what became the Phoenician alphabet, and then what became the Hebrew version. It's kind of like when you look at English, and you look at Old English, and it was originally written in runes. So that's what the whole, but that's really where everything lies with that one. Anyway, because like runes, like kind of like letter-like, but not. But it's never mind. What I mean to say is Ugaritic actually did have an alphabet shape. It looked like cuneiform, but it actually was not, and it wasn't even related. Another thing is I did last week when I had Hebrew class, they mentioned something really cool. And I never even thought of this, and it was so cool I wanted to share it with you. So the word, the name, Tamar, means date palm or palm tree. So it could either be one or the other, but it usually means something that's beautiful. In Song of Songs, the woman is described as being a beautiful palm tree. The image of a palm tree is a very beautiful figure. So you have two people named Tamar in Genesis, and it's interesting when you look at their stories, because if anyone remembers, like when someone named a child after the word bitterness, what story was that? Anyone shoot that in there? The name bitterness, Mara.
Was it Ruth?
Ruth, yes, exactly. And so because my life is bitter, Mara. Now, so the M-A-R is exactly the same spelling of the M-R version of Tamar. Because remember, Hebrew is weird with the vowels. So the presentation of it is, so Tamar, the characters, two of them, are seen as being beautiful, and you would expect great things to happen, but for both of them, really terrible fates happen to them. I'm sorry, they're not both in Genesis, by the way. The other one has to do with around the time of Absalom. But both of those characters have beautiful names, beautiful appearances, all that stuff, but terrible things happen to them. And so their lives become bitter. And I thought that was a really cool way of looking at things. And it goes, once again, to the wordplay that happens when you look at Hebrew. There is a lot of wordplay. And we're going to get to some of that tonight, too. So, first of all, I'm prepared all the way through Exodus, but it really depends on how far we get for anything, for whatever conversations we get into. We might not get to certain concepts, but we'll see. So, all right. Now, I am going to share my screen. We're going to talk about a few key concepts of Hebrew grammar because, once again, if we have time to go to these things, we will be talking about them tonight. So we'll go ahead and be looking at things here. I'm just going to do a really quick overview of some certain concepts. So a couple of things that I do want to make clear. Hebrew is an extremely inflected language. Does anyone, I don't care who it is, does anyone know what inflection is? It's an inflected, heavily inflected language. Mom?
Emphasis on syllables.
Close.
It's like when you emphasize, when you're trying to make a point and you inflect your words.
Almost. Right. You got the idea. Any other guesses before I explain it? Shout me down if you want to. Okay, an example of inflection in English is when you say go and then like it's he or she goes. That is a form of inflection. That's verbal conjugation. Another thing is like go wing, adding like something like that. Another way that you can do it is through declension, such as with nouns or with like pronouns like he becomes him, becomes his. stuff like that. Another way is through nouns becoming plural. So if I say book and you say books, that's English inflection. English is a lightly inflected language. So Hebrew is very inflected.
No, I always thought inflection was like the tones that you used in sarcasm.
That if you're talking about intonation.
Okay.
Intonation is how your voice goes up and down, and then stress becomes part of that. But inflection is when you add things to a word, you separate, you change the vowel. Oh, another way that English can inflect is through vowel changes, which is like foot becoming feet. But Hebrew is heavily inflected, and I mean they have endings out the wazoo. They have like ways of developing words through various like suffixes, anything. There's a lot of different ways. Vowel changes, all of that. It's very, very popular in Hebrew. It's not the most inflected one I've ever seen. In my personal opinion, I think Turkish is quite high up on that list. But it is heavily inflected. Another thing about Hebrew grammar, does anyone know what the word order is? So in English, we typically have a subject, a verb, object word order, which is like if I say I am a person, for example. Or that's actually not right because I just used an is form. But if I have a book, I have a book. So that is the subject, the verb is have, and book is the object. That is typically the English version. What?
Joe, the second definition of inflection is the modulation of intonation.
Yeah.
Or pitch. So that is. But your definition is the first.
The first one.
The first one. Mine is the second.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
But English is a subject verb object language. German, for example, is SV1 object V2, which is a totally different way of doing things. But actually, it's subject verb 2 object. No, you're right. It's verb 1 and then object V2. That's German, which would mean like I have my brother seen would be like the German way of saying things. French, for example, is just like us. It's subject, verb, object. Old Chinese used to be subject, object, verb. Modern Chinese is just like English today. Latin used to be subject, object, verb, mostly. Although it was very flexible. Anyone know what Hebrew is? The one I haven't mentioned yet. Anyone? You, Mom? Verb, subject, object. So that means if I were to say I made a cake in the I wouldn't say I. Let me just say the man or the woman made cake. I don't know why. The Hebrew way would be made the woman a cake or something like that. And that's the word order there. There are also very strict rules when it comes to if a word is defined as definite or not. Definiteness in English is written or is shown with the word the. Hebrew has one word for the, but there are many ways of showing definiteness in Hebrew. Names in English, just like in Hebrew, are also definite, but there's a strange word in Hebrew, and it's the only case type word, but there is a weird word that we will see probably today or next week that says that the following is a definite direct object. So it's weird, and I know I'm probably hey, if I'm not, that's awesome, but I might be going over your head on this one. But there's a reason why I'm showing that, because we're going to look at how difficult things can be to translate. So like in Hebrew grammar as well, it's really interesting because they don't have tense. We already talked about that, like we would understand tense. And it's funny where they're very, 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 I guess you could say, precise in certain ways. they're not as precise in other ways, which I think is really interesting. So it's like there are some ways that you could tell this is relatively like yet to really develop language, but then there are some places where it's like more developed than we are. Although English is debatably a Creole, I'm not even going into that. But anyway, I'm talking way too much, so I'll go ahead and shut up. So regarding that, so all right, guys. So that's just the introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. So, that's done. All right, so we left off on where we left off at the end of chapter 4 of Exodus. Now, we are going to be looking a lot at the interlinear, which means we're going to be looking at the Hebrew, and it's going to be a lot of fun, in my opinion. So, all right, so chapter 5. The beginning of the wonders are here. We already covered how there are 12 wonders that Pharaoh witnesses from Moses. Remember, it's like two gods battling it out. And the first one has to do with the staff. Now, before it turns into a snake, the hosh, but then it becomes a tanin. And so you have it's a different word altogether, and the word tanin is the one that's used in Genesis 1. That means like the sea monster. So we're going to start with that. All right. So in chapter 5, verses 2 to 3, is that so? Retorted Pharaoh, and who is Yahweh? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord. I don't know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. Now, so remember the word to know. We were talking about this before when it comes to we're looking at Genesis 6, or to know also has like a very intimate meaning to it. So when Pharaoh says, "I don't know him," that actually is also inferring that like among all the gamut of gods that I know, or since I myself am a god, like he is one that I'm not familiar with. Maybe it's potential that is also saying I never heard of this Lord, but this one's more like he's not on par with me. He's nothing compared to who I am. And so it's very clear in that way. It's still debatable, though. It could have been possible you never heard of it. But anyway. And so it says, I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Oh, and another reason why it could potentially be that he's never heard of it was because God says that like they never called on his name before. So that's another thing. So anyway. But, verse 3, but Aaron and Moses persisted. The God of the Hebrews has met with us, they declared. So let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so we can offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we don't, he will kill us with a plague or with the sword. It's interesting, first of all, that that's not what God is saying whatsoever. So it's interesting here that they are, in essence, lying to Pharaoh, if you're looking at it from that perspective. Although there's a story where Micaiah gets a lying spirit. So sometimes, we're going to get into the commandments later. What the commandments do say is don't make a false witness. So the fact is the potential for Moses and Aaron to be fibbing a little bit, or quite a lot, before a king, I mean, it's still not necessarily considered like a wrong thing to do. Now, because first of all, this is nothing, a slight lie in that perspective is nothing compared to what Pharaoh is doing to the Hebrews. So, anyway. Not to mention, too, the 3-day journey into the wilderness. And when you think also of Jesus dying, he was dead in the wilderness, if you will, for 3 days. And that comes back a lot in these texts. So, all right, verse 16. Oh, by the way, anyone who has anything to say, please jump in because I'm just going to keep on rolling. So if you have anything to say, jump in. So,
I just had a thought.
Go for it.
I had a thought. that one reason Pharaoh may have been really disdainful of the God of the Hebrews was he's probably thinking, or could have been thinking, I won't say probably, he could have been thinking that who's this God that can't even keep his people out of slavery?
That's very potential.
He was maybe thinking he was pretty weak if he allowed his people.
Right, because, we will get to that. No, you're absolutely right, because, we'll get to that later. How does God talk to the surrounding nations, except through the language of war that they know and understand? So, they absolutely understand the concept of strength. And to Pharaoh, Israel wasn't strong. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yep. But then not long from now, they have a battle. And when they do, then you have the strength of the Lord there with, when Moses is holding up the staff. Anyway, verse 16. We are given no straw, but the slave drivers will still demand, make bricks. This is quite clearly callbacks to with Babylon, Babel, when they were making bricks, and everything that looks exactly the same. So it's now they're being forced to make these bricks without straw as well. It's an added level of intensity when it comes to that. So we're being beaten, but it isn't our fault. Your own people are to blame. Anyway, so verse 23. Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesman, he has been even more brutal to your people, and you have done nothing to rescue them. He went back to the Lord and said these things. And I think this is quite clear evidence that you can go to the Lord and frustrated. I can definitely see that. David did in the Psalms. I think that is, once again, one common thing that we have here in modern society, where it's not such a great idea to go to the Lord upset like this, or at times accusing him, but you have it right here. When Moses goes back to Pharaoh, and so he says, and you did nothing to rescue them. Interesting, but chapter 6, verse 3. So this is it. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty. But I did not reveal my name, Yahweh, to them. Now, my thing here has, El Shaddai is used for his name in Genesis 17, 1, 28, 3, 35, 11, 43, 14, and 48, 3. But he actually does. Does anyone remember? We actually mentioned it slightly. Does anyone remember a time when his name was presented during one of those three patriarchs' lives? In Genesis 13:4, we can go ahead and go there. I'm going to use the interlinear. Genesis 13:4. There's one. So Abram himself called on the name. And there it is, right there. And then you also have 14:22. So, by the way, notice the Hebrew word order. Notice it's verb, subject, object. So Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to Yahweh. So Abram said this. Interesting. Another one is 22:14. Abraham, so this time his name was changed. He called it, he will provide. So, interesting that he actually names a place, Yahweh will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mountain of Yahweh it shall be provided. So, or on the mountain of God. And anyway, you have 32:29. This one is debatable. This last one's debatable, but still, Jacob said, "Tell me your name," and the angel said, "Why?" Why? But it is interesting there. Now, though the name is not explicitly said, but he did ask directly for the name. But I think it's clear though when it comes to Abraham, he did refer to him as Yahweh, at least according to Scripture. So either the Bible is making a direct contradiction with itself, which is potential. Scribes added it later. That's potential. Or something else is being said here. And I think this is something that I would just say this. When it comes to, like, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob and El Shaddai, but I did not reveal my name Yahweh to them. I think it's potential. Like, I think the easiest explanation with this one would be that the scribes added it later. Then when you come to that place name, that's interesting. But that God will provide. But, yeah, it is an interesting thing to ponder, and I think it's something that is, among, I guess you could say, modern congregations, potentially heretical to say. That the Bible is being contradictory in nature here. If you go based on the fundamentalist perspective, it is being contradictory, and so it's interesting. And I think it's interesting because I have, not necessarily with this subject, but I've heard a lot of bending over backwards to explain things away. In my opinion, that it doesn't hold water. So, all right, go ahead.
I have a thought on that.
Please do.
This makes it kind of curious to me that that God's name was a big deal as a sign to the Israelite leaders. That's who sent Moses.
Mm-hmm. I will be. Yeah. Yep.
Yahweh, that was one of the signs that he gave them with the leprosy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is. Yep.
And the staff. God's name, the leprosy, and the staff were signs to the Israelite elders before he went to Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a curiosity to me that they would have even recognized that was anything special.
Well, I mean, for crying out loud, if someone were to throw a staff down on the ground, it becomes a snake.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the name itself.
Oh, the name. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, what should I tell them? That my name. I am.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It took me a second. Yeah, it is interesting. It also is an interesting thing too about his name. We're going to talk about attributes. Remember, his name is an attribute. Like his name in and of itself is an attribute of God. Like when you say his name, there will also be times when he says my name, or the angel of the Lord, or the angel of Yahweh will be also referred to as my angel. He's talking about himself quite clearly. Like when it's talking about, but he will talk about my angel. Because remember, the angel of the Lord, whose angel? The Lord's angel. So when the Lord's speaking, it's my angel. And so it's really cool there. And so we have the angel of the Lord, the name itself. Then you have the thing called the name. And then you also just have the Lord or my Lord. There are so many ways that God is portrayed in Scripture, or at least denominated, named. I'll just say is named. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead here. Like I said before, jump in if you want to, because I'm just going to keep going, because there's so much stuff. And I'll pause and have conversations, but I'll just keep the train rolling if no one has anything else to say, and I'll just let that be the last time for the whole rest of the evening. So, I will, verse 7, and it's interesting that it's verse 7. I will claim you as my own people, and I will be your God. This is an interesting statement here. What does the end of Revelation say? That he will be their God, and they will be his people, and he will be their God. This is huge. This is a major statement he's making.
I will claim you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who has freed you from your oppression in Egypt.
Now, the word I am is actually not, so you have to understand, the word that he uses before to say, like, I am that I am, is not the same as the actual word for I, which is translated as I am. Hebrew does not have a word for to be. The verb be does not exist in Hebrew. So they have copula statements, which means that this equals this. And so what he says is ani, or Anochi, Yahweh, which means I, the Lord, or I, Yahweh, which is interesting. Anyway, but I will claim you as my own people, and I will be your God. So that's verse 7. Look at the 12th verse. So, but Lord, Moses objected, my own people won't listen to me anymore. How can I expect Pharaoh to listen? I'm such a clumsy speaker. And then you have, anything else here? In verse 16, it's funny that that Moses is objecting here, but he already lost that argument before. But anyway, verse 16. Well, he didn't lose that argument because anyway, you know what I mean. These are the descendants of Levi as listed in their family records. The sons of Levi were blah, 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 blah. Levi lived to be 137 years old. It's interesting that you got the 3 and the 7 right there, right next to each other. This becomes a pretty big thing here. So it's Levi himself dies at 137. Then you have 16. Oh, we already did that. 18. The descendants of Kohath included blah, 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 blah. Kohath lived to be 133. Then you have verse 20. Amram married his father's sister Jochebed, and she gave birth to his sons Aaron and Moses. Amram lived to be 137. Then we also have verse 21. Oh, did I accidentally say that? Oh, yeah, I accidentally wrote a wrong one. Oops. Well, somewhere in there. But you get what I'm talking about. I accidentally miswrote. I had a typo in my notes, so I don't know what I was trying to say there. But it is clear with the years that there's interesting number play. And then you have in verse 30, but Moses argued with the Lord, saying, I can't do it. I'm such a clumsy speaker. Why should Pharaoh listen to me? 3 times he said this. 3 times he says this. So it's so you have the different times it goes, well, who's that? I know Aaron loves to speak. That was the first time. You have twice in this chapter. Don't tell me there isn't a lot of number play with the number 3, the number 7, the number 12. It gets interesting. All right, chapter 7. So this is the beginning. So notice, how many chapters are there in Exodus? 40. How many years were they in the wilderness? 40. How many days was Moses on Sinai? 40. How many? So this is huge. Okay, also remember Noah. There were 40 days and 40 nights involved with that as well. Cool. Now, another thing here is chapter-wise, there's something happening every 7 chapters or so. Definitely every 12 chapters. That's a different thing. So you have 12, 24, and 36 have something going on. 7 and 14 have something interesting. 14 ends it with the sea eating up Pharaoh. So from 7, you have the beginning of the wonders happening. And it's interesting how there's things going on. You're going to have some chapters that begin with 7 words. You're going to have it's everywhere in this. So let's begin. Chapter 7. And I'm not talking bankruptcy. Chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, pay close attention to this. I will make you seem like God to Pharaoh. This is huge. We talked about the importance of this. You will look like a God to him. And your brother, Aaron, will be your prophet. But the reality of the matter is that Moses is the Lord's prophet and Aaron is his spokesperson. But it is interesting that what they're going to do, what the Lord's going to do through them, is make Pharaoh, who believes he is a god, will see Moses as his counterpart and also his ruler. And it's really interesting. So I keep saying that. It's really interesting. So, all right, verses 9 to 10. Pharaoh will demand, show me a miracle. When he does, this begins it. Pharaoh asks for it. This is it's crazy. So he asks to be shown. Okay, so Pharaoh will demand, show me a miracle. When he does this, say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down in front of Pharaoh, and it will become a serpent. So, does anyone have a little asterisk on where it says serpent in their Bible? Mine does. Mine actually does, and I'm surprised. We already talked about it before. We know that it's actually saying the dragon thing, the sea dragon, the chaos monster. It's interesting what my note says is Hebrew Tanim. We talked about that, which elsewhere refers to a sea monster. Greek version translates it as dragon. I love how honest this version is, and I think it's really cool how honest my translation here is. That's nice. And does anyone else have that or anything similar to that? All right. So it will become a tanin. Pharaoh, remember, asks for it. So when it does happen, so Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did what the Lord had commanded them. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a tanin. So yeah, this is huge. Now, remember, the sorcerers were able to create their own version, and so they threw down these staffs. But the one that Aaron threw down consumed the other one. So that was a power play. And so their version of this chaos monster, and remember, the Lord himself created, according to the biblical story, he created the Tanin, which was considered one of the creation deities in many cultures. And it's so what God is basically saying is, I rule over this. And remember, this is a sea dragon from the sea. Remember what one of the first things God does is he separates the waters from the waters. So he puts the waters above and he pushes down the waters below, so that way the firmament can come up. Page 1. Yeah, page 1, right. The firmament can come up. This is stuff that we did weeks ago, but I'm just refreshing you that it goes in a backwards order, kind of, sort of, when it comes to the plagues. Now, it's not exactly like it did with Noah, where it was just kind of like everything went like that, but it's interesting that you have like a de-ordering going on. And so what's happening is that you have, he keeps chaos in check, but yet this chaos monster comes out from a staff, which is interesting. All right, and then we have the next plague. Actually, the first plague, second wonder. So verse 25. Okay, so before we even do that, gotta understand about the mound. We talked about Egypt's creation stories before. That it was a mound, that Earth was a mound, that there was sexual friction between the water and the mound, and they revered that water. And the fact that that water became blood is a huge deal. This is their perception of chaos is getting more chaotic. And this, also the Mediterranean Sea was also part of that chaos. But this is huge that the Nile, their source of life, was turning into blood. For everyone in here, we all know, really, that a lot of the plagues go against their concept of deities as well. I'm not going to talk about that much, but think about, like, so this is God infesting the waters. What happens in Revelation when there is this thing called wormwood that falls into the water? What? It turns into blood. This is what's being said here is that the chaos waters are dismantled and become deadly, deadlier than they're usually perceived as being. So first you have the chaos monster that breaks forth from its boundary. Now you have the waters themselves are becoming dismantled, and so they had to dig in the land in order for them to get water. This is big parallels and contrast with Genesis 1 right now. So, verse 25, 7 days passed from the time the Lord struck the Nile. This is absolutely making a play on the 7 days of creation. He's dismantling everything. And this is pretty intense. So, yeah?
Another observation that just kind of thinking about the dynamic between Pharaoh and Moses, just one of the underlying dynamics under all of these plagues, that any other person, I think, in Egypt, especially a Hebrew, that came up face to face against Pharaoh the way Moses did, wouldn't have lived very long.
Mm-hmm.
Yet Pharaoh allowed Moses to continue without killing him. It's just a curiosity. I just have that in the back of my mind when I'm reading through these.
Yeah, I think also, too, Jesus just walking through the crowd.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but there's a dynamic, I think, here between them.
Yeah, I think there is, too. I think also it's potential, if you look into it that way, Pharaoh might have been humoring Moses at the beginning with the whole throwing down of the staff.
He might have been just a little bit, I think maybe a little bit, just a little bit shy of going against him just in case he might be a god or in league with a god.
Yeah, that's true. Like, and wanted to be somewhat respectful. I'm not going to go, like, that's one thing, the Bible doesn't say it.
Right, exactly.
It just doesn't say it. So
exactly.
I'm not going to really
right, exactly. What I'm saying is here, though, that it's just interesting that in any other case, the guy wouldn't have lived too much longer.
That's true.
But Moses was allowed to continue.
All right. Chapter 8, verse 7. But the magicians were able to do the same thing with their magic. They, too, caused frogs to come up from the land of Egypt. If you remember the creation story, you have the waters being separated. You have God filling the place with the lights. And then you have the birds of the air as well as the fish of the sea. And where do the frogs appear from? The Nile. They come out of the water. And this is like, so they're coming out of the water and they become an infestation. They're everywhere, and when they die, they stink, and it's like crazy disorder happening right now. But the thing is that's interesting is that the magicians were able to keep things going a bit, and it's still interesting that this is the third wonder. But yeah, and Pharaoh is instantaneously turned off from that. But here, notice one thing that's interesting. And I do have to refer to my notes real quick. Okay, so in the first plague, second wonder, Pharaoh, he doesn't listen because the magicians could mimic the whole blood thing. Then this one, the third wonder, second plague, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, and he said, plead with the Lord to get rid of this. So he asks Moses to go to the Lord and say, hey, call this off. This is important. It gets more intense as things go on. All right, so 19, verse 19. Okay. So this is with the whole gnats. So we had things coming out of the water. Where did the gnats come from? The skies. They came from the air.
19 is lice, isn't it? Because 18, the lice came up. And
Gnats.
19.
What is it talking
Yours says
about?
net, and where are
Gnats.
we? And 19? 8, 19?
Yeah.
Yeah, 18. Look at 18.
I think it's also, it's lice or gnats, but it's
Yeah, lice.
Gnats. All the dust.
And I'm sorry, I did make a misnomer there. Sorry. One other thing we're talking about, the dust. Sorry about that. Yeah, it doesn't. You said lice. Isn't that what are lice? They're these little things that jump around, or not?
Lice are little like spider type things that crawl around.
They jump, don't they? They're like kind of like
no. That's a different translation.
Wait a second here.
Oh, here's another way. It does say gnats here in 16.
Yeah.
There's a different translation on that.
Okay. So, it's gnats or lice. But yeah, still, the concept is that the dust where man came from becomes these crazy infestations. It's so cool. All right. Now, in verse 19, the magicians say, this is the finger of God. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at what the interlinear says. So, is it of God or of gods? I did not explain the grammar, but what do you think? Of God or of the gods? There is no word for the here. It's not there. So, it's God, singular. Because of the word the is not there. If you were to make that plural, you would need either the word the there, or you would need to have a preposition there. But that's not the case. This is being treated as a name. So this is definite in and of itself. So you have the finger of God. So they're actually, this is God's finger. So this is really treating this is the greatest God there is, the Elohim of Elohim. It's this God's finger. That actually it's really cool stuff. So here, remember, they could mimic things, and then they're like, oh, this is above us. This is really above us right now. And it's to me, that's really cool. You can see the progression. And then you have the magicians, they fail there. Verse 27. We must take a 3-day trip into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, just as he commanded us. I just wanted to reinforce that they're still taking the 3-day trip into the wilderness. And then, so here, you have Pharaoh saying, all right, go for it. This is with the flies. So remember, this is the 4th plague, the 5th, saying the flies definitely come from the air. And so you have the water, the dust, the air. So pretty much everything's getting infested. Then you have, I'm just checking here. So then this is where the Pharaoh actually asks Moses to go ahead and have them do their sacrifices. And then you have the next plague, which is livestock. So remember, we had God filled the land with all the things filled the waters with the fish or anything that swims, and anything that flies, he fills with the air. It fills the air. So we had all these plagues getting that part done. Then you had the livestock, the things that were about the earth, right before the creation of man. And it's interesting, too, that it's the fifth, as well as the fifth plague and the sixth wonder, but the fifth plague, okay? And this is, and then you have the livestock are infested at this point, or infected at this point. And so this is really an interesting, like, everything's collapsing in on itself situation. And so verse 7, Pharaoh sent his officials to investigate, and they discovered that the Israelites had not lost a single animal. But even so, Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn, and he still refused to let the people go. So this is officially the sixth wonder. So we're halfway done. And the fifth plague, and Pharaoh says no. He does nothing, actually. And so you go to the next one, verse 12. So remember, the magicians could repeat. Then they said, this is above us. Then you have verse 12. Interesting that in verse 7, Pharaoh said no. And then in verse 12, you have, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and just as the Lord had predicted to Moses, Pharaoh refused to listen. It's interesting that in verse 7 and in verse 12, same things happen. Then you have, and then it was at this point, if you look at 11, what's interesting, even the magicians were unable to stand before Moses. Not only did they recognize it above them, they couldn't even stand because of how they were getting, because the boils had broken out on them and all the Egyptians. Because now, this is the sixth plague and the seventh wonder. And it's interesting that on the sixth plague, the people are harmed. I wonder if there's any correlation with Genesis 1. And so you have, it's fascinating. Now, let's take a look at verse 14. So verse 14, if you don't, I will send more plagues on you and your officials and your people. Then you will know that there is no one like me on all the earth. So this is the Lord speaking. Then you have verse 21, where he says, but those who paid no attention to the word of the Lord left theirs out in the open. It's interesting. So he says, if you do this, I will send you more plagues. And then it says, but then they left theirs out in the open. Then you had verse 24. Never in all the history of Egypt had there been a storm like that, with such devastating hail and continuous lightning. It left, and then this is verse 25, it left all of Egypt in ruins. So now remember, we had the water, the dust, the air, the livestock, the people, and now it's like everything. The hail is coming from the skies, and it's crashing down into the water, and everything is getting dismantled. This is really powerful. And then you have verse 28. Remember 4 times 7. Get out of here. So let's read. If I remember it, this is the chapter where it was really interesting, and it does do this a lot. Okay, so verse 7. Just listen. Verse 7. I'm going to go verse 7, 14, 21, and 28. So Pharaoh sent his officials to investigate, and they discovered that the Israelites had not lost a single animal. But even so, Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn. So it was stubborn, and he refused. This is chiastic parallelism, what is about to happen. So you have things happening in opposite directions. So, verse 14. If you don't, I will send more plagues on you and your officials and your people. Then you will know that there's no one like me in all the earth. So Pharaoh says no. God says, I'm going to do something huge. Verse 21. But those who paid no attention to the word of the Lord left theirs out in the open. Bam. So you have, once again, the closing of the heart thing. And so God does exactly what he says he's going to do. And in verse 28, Pharaoh says, get out of here. The 28. Please beg, I'm sorry, I messed up the chapter. Verse 28, please beg the Lord to end this terrifying thunder and hail. We have had enough. I will let you go. You don't need to stay any longer. So this is really cool how you have like the parallels here going on. And then you have chapter 10, 36 for the last chapter. Okay, chapter 10, verse 1. Okay, so then the Lord said to Moses, return to Pharaoh and make your demands again. I have made him and his officials stubborn, so I can display my miraculous signs among them. So I hardened his heart. Now, it's funny because we're starting all over again, that concept. At this point, Egypt is in shambles. It is really dismantled, according to it. This is really getting intense, obviously. Oh, I forgot to mention. Oh no, this is it. Okay, cool. Now let's take a look at verse 3. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, said. How long will you refuse to submit to me? Let my people go, so they can worship me. Verse 7. I'm hammering down the important numbers, and every single one of these has an important saying to them. If you look at the surrounding verses, they're not as important. So it is pretty clear that they're putting very important statements in these very important sections here. And these orders were done at a later point in time. Of course they were. But we talked about the prevalence of editing and why they repeat certain things. They could have easily moved things up or down by adding more words and more statements and segmenting things. So this, in my opinion, is very intentional. So verse 7. Pharaoh's officials now came to Pharaoh and appealed to him. How long will you let this man hold us hostage? Let the men go to worship the Lord their God. Don't you realize that Egypt lies in ruins? Verse 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the land of Egypt to bring on the locusts. Let them devour the land and devour every plant that survived the hailstorm. So this is like obliteration. And then verse 14. Oh, by the way, wait a second. Why did I say that? Oh, yeah, wait a second. Let me see something. Okay, so this is huge. Another thing, too, is like verses 3 and 7. You have Moses and Aaron going there, and the Pharaoh won't listen. Then you have his own people going to him, and Pharaoh won't listen. And then you have, anyway, the plague happens. And the locusts, in verse 14, and the locusts swarmed over the whole land of Egypt, settling in dense swarms from one end of the country to the other. It was the worst locust plague in Egyptian history, and there has never been another one like it. And then verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, lift your hand toward heaven, and the land of Egypt will be covered with a darkness so thick you can feel it. This is the 10th wonder and the 9th plague. And you have verse 28. Oh wait, that was 21, right? Oh yeah, 24. Finally, Pharaoh called for Moses, go and worship the Lord, he said. But leave your flocks and herds here. You may even take your little ones with you. So wait, here, okay, that's 24, 28. Get out of here, Pharaoh shouted at Moses. I'm warning you, never come back to see me again. The day you see my face, you will die. First time you hear that, similar statement, is when you have Adam and Eve, and God says, the day you eat of it, you'll die. It's interesting, too, that you were talking about how how God relents. Well, here Pharaoh really has no choice but to relent because he does encounter him later. And it's interesting too that Pharaoh is the one that ends up dying, but that's the point. Now, we're talking about seeing faces. Pharaoh is, remember, according to the Egyptians, and also kind of sort of to what the Bible is saying, a god. We're talking about seeing God's face as well, right? And it's funny that you have, like, for example, remember when Jacob said, I have seen the Lord's face and lived? Like you have, oh no, I'm sorry, that was Tamar that said that. Hagar. I'm getting my names mixed up. But you know what I'm saying. We've encountered this. So Pharaoh is saying, if you see my face, I will kill you. You will die that day. So this is a major point. And then in verse 29, so very well, Moses replied, I'll never see your face again. Now, so remember that Pharaoh is talking about like how his face is, like if you see my face, you'll die. Look also in the same chapter, go back to verse 10. So we're talking about the concept of the deity of Pharaoh. Verse 10, the Lord will certainly need to be with you if I let you take the little one. I can see through your evil plan. So Pharaoh is deciding what is good and what is evil. And here you also say, the day you see my face, you will die. Interesting parallelism here, and it's definitely something to ponder. So, all right, then you have a really interesting thing happen in chapter 11. What plague is this? Shout it out when you know.
15.
What number?
10.
How many verses are in chapter 11? And what wonder is the 10th plague? What number wonder?
11.
What chapter are we in? You're supposed to laugh. So so tell me that this is not happening, okay? So like I made sure that everything I present has something to it, okay? So yeah, this is the 11th wonder in chapter 11. It's the 10th plague, which is 10 verses long to describe. So anyway, hardy har. So it's a terrible thing to talk about, like the whole plague itself, but interesting. By the way, so actually that's all I got with that. You can just read the plague for yourself. It's every verse has an interesting detail to it. Chapter 12. What's in chapter 12? The Passover. How many tribes are there? 13 tribes, right? There are 12 tribes. How many wonders does Pharaoh see? In essence, 12. He will see 12 eventually. Yeah, I think my point is being made clear. So, verses 8 to 9 of chapter 12. That same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. We'll get to that. The whole animal, including the head, legs, and internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. We will come back to the whole boiling fire thing later. That's not for today. But one thing that is interesting is the concept of eating something raw. We talked about that before. Does anyone remember why eating raw meat, as in like with all the blood in it? I'm not talking about like mildly cooked raw. We're talking about like just dyed raw. Why? Why is that a big deal?
Animalistic?
Yeah, you're animalistic. And that happens with the quail in Numbers. Although not necessarily with the quail in Exodus. But anyway. Okay, so you got that. Thank you. Then you have, we'll come back to the boiling in the fire at a later date. That we will not talk about that today because I'm going to have to do some, when we get to that point, I will be going back and forth. So just earmark that section there. Okay, cool. Verse 7, okay. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm about to do this. I'm going to read these following verses. I want you to listen to them. I'm trying to see why I said one verse, though. Just hold on 1 second. Let me see why I said one thing. Oh, yeah, because of the 3. Okay, so there was the 3 thing there. Okay, but that was a weak one. But anyway, I'm going to read the entire chapter in very important verse numbers, okay? I'm going to tell you what the verses are, but then you can just close your eyes and listen as I read it, okay? 7, 12, 14, 21, 24, 28, 30, 35, 36, 40, 42, 48, and 49. So you have, yeah, it's going to be interesting. So hold on. I'm just going to have to go reference it here. I should have probably prepared this beforehand, but that's okay. So they are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and the top of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. Please turn the page. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, "Go pick out a lamb or young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal." Remember, these instructions are a permanent law that you and your descendants must observe forever. So the people of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded through Moses and Aaron. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and a loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. And the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of all their wealth. I just read 35 and 36, although you could just read 36. There's a thing with 35 with stuff in. Anyway, we'll talk later. But all right. The people of Israel had lived in Egypt for 430 years. Okay. 4 plus 3, come on. Like, we're talking 7 here. And I'm not really stretching it here because we've talked about, 40 years, what I gotta see. Sorry, pardon me. We've talked about the number play before. And if you, how you say it in Hebrew would be 400, 310. So, like, it would be 4 plus 3 that we're looking at here. It's not that far-fetched. Oh, yeah, we just looked at verse 30 versus verse 40. Anyway, we're getting into it. But anyway, yeah, we talked about verse 30, which is where all the wailing happened. And then we have 30, 31, 36, and 40. And then 40, in verse 40, the people of Israel had lived in Egypt for 430 years. Then you have 42. On this night, the Lord kept his promise to bring his people out of the land of Egypt. So it's interesting that verse 30 has the wailing, verse 40 has the number of years that they're there, and then you have the next important number verse that he pulled them out of Egypt. Then you have 48. If there are foreigners living among you who want to celebrate the Lord's Passover, let all their males be circumcised. Only then may they celebrate the Passover with you like any native-born Israelite. But no uncircumcised male may ever eat the Passover meal. 49. This instruction applies to everyone.
whether a native-born Israelite or a foreigner living among you.
So I'm going to stop there for a second. You could basically read the whole chapter in that, but you're not really missing that much of any details except for like how to prepare the animal or stuff like that. The essence of the chapter is in those core verses, which is really fascinating when you're talking about the number of verses that we're talking about. So anyway, it's really fascinating. Now, like there really isn't okay, wait a second. Now, when you're talking about the reaction, is when you, in 31, which I did not read. Now, that's one big part there. Is after verse 30, when everyone was affected. You have verse 31, where Pharaoh sent for Moses and said, just go, just get out of here. But, yes.
Interestingly enough, Moses said, you won't see my face again.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. I did forget to mention that. That one I did have lined up, but
so yeah. I'm wondering if Pharaoh actually sent messengers. He says, rise, go out from among my people. Unless he meant rise as a people. And go.
Yeah.
But if he actually did see him, that's a contradiction.
And not to mention, he also probably saw him when he sent chariots after him, too.
True. Well,
so. Did not Pharaoh die?
There schools of thought on that either way.
I think probably. I think probably the point was this God was defeated and eaten by the waters. But we're not there yet. Now I understand what you mean that that Pharaoh might not have been destroyed. I think it's making it clear though in the biblical story. I'm not talking about historicity or anything like that. In the biblical story, it is that at least his essence is swallowed up by the water. I personally believe that the Bible is saying the Pharaoh was swallowed up as well. Now, although it is debatable. So 13:7, I'm going to stop at a certain point, so we're just going to keep going until we hit a certain point. So 13:7, interesting that it's 13:7, 137. Anyway, eat bread without yeast during those 7 days. In fact, there must be no yeast bread or any yeast at all found within the borders of your land during this time. So this is the dedication of the firstborn, as well as when it talks about the this Passover thing. This is the feast of unleavened bread, and there should be no yeast for 7 days. And this is talked about in verse 7 of chapter 13, which is anyway. Verse 12. You must present all firstborn sons and firstborn male animals to the Lord, for they belong to him. Firstborn, very important thing. We will talk about this later. Not sure if it's today, but it'll be before the end of Exodus. Then we have 16. This ceremony will be like a mark branded on your hand. That would have meant how you worked. Your work was very often equated with your hand. Or your forehead. I used to think it meant thinking. That's not what it means. Thinking is done in the heart, according to Hebrew scripture. So when something is branded on your forehead, it's like you are showing who you are and what you represent. This is like, I am this type of an individual. And then what your hand has something to do with how you work, what you do on a day-to-day basis. So who you say you are, and as well as what you actually do. And so that's what it means. I used to think it meant thinking, but in Hebrew thought, thinking is in the heart. So, sorry, because I was pointing, you know. So, okay, verse 17. Oh, yeah, it is a reminder, 16. It is a reminder that the power of the Lord's mighty hand brought us out of Egypt. So we're talking about that you can't see the Lord's face, as well as, or sometimes you can, but that's totally different conversation, as well as his hand bringing them out. So he says he is one God, but yet his hand also makes it happen. So this is also a sign on your forehead as well as your own hand. So anyway, now 17. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So, that they might, so the Lord himself said, if they get battle way too early on, they might change their mind. Even this, so it's already, the beginning here is not quite great when talking about the Israelites. And they're like children here. He's looking at the Israelites like little babies in this sense. Because it's like, imagine if like you save like a child and then you throw them into like a really bad situation like that. In that sense, I can see where the Lord is going with that. Anyway, all right. That's one before the break. Chapter 14, verse 7. Oh, by the way, we're in chapter 14. And the wonders began in chapter 7. So, all right, so let's go 14, verse 7. He took with him 600. Very interesting number. So 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. So this is, he took with him, so anyway. Yeah, when it says harness his chariot, like, I can understand where Mom's coming from, where it's like his chariot's seen as a collective body, but I personally don't agree. I still see that there's validity there, so I'm not saying it's not what the Bible is saying. So just so I'm giving credence to what you're saying as well. So anyway,
Lost me.
In chapter 14, verse 6, he harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. But what you're saying is that potential that it was his collective body of army. He harnessed his chariot. You're saying that the Pharaoh didn't die when the waters swallowed.
Oh, I said there are schools of thought on it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's what I was saying was like, here you could potentially think that his chariot could be his collective army, but I don't think so. But anyway, that's one thing. Anyway, so we got chapter 14, verse 7, right? Why don't we jump to 14? The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Then you have 21. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that. Oh, strong east wind. The wind blew. One thing about God's presence is that God's presence usually comes from the east. But anyway, so the winds blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. Then you have verse 28. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. All the Egyptians who had chased the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. I can see this because you didn't really have the mentioning of Pharaoh. But anyway, that's totally beyond the point. So I just read 4 verses. Verses 7, 14, 21, and 28. The whole story is in those 4. Once again, let's read them. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its own commander. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and the charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. Of all the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. Now, there's an additional verse that I did not mention, is where, because this is just an interesting thing to me. Verse 15, then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving." I've always loved that verse. I think it's funny. It's like, why are you sitting there crying out to me? Do something about it. it's in your hands on that one. Of course, I'm going to help you, but don't just sit there just talking about it all the time. But anyway, now, so we're at the end of 14. So remember, it began with water, it ended with water. And the whole thing is with the sea dragon. You have the sea dragon coming up like instilling chaos within the world. In a sense, this chaos monster began the chaos, right? The chaos ended by the sea eating the Pharaoh's army. And this is chaos itself doing what chaos does. This is why people were so terrified of the sea or anything based on like running water. So this is really definitely making a comment on how dangerous the chaos will be when the Lord relinquishes control over it. So when you have his binding presence with Noah, for example, kept the two waters like separated. But when God removed that, they crashed in on each other. And then you have the same thing with, actually it's kind of the opposite. When you have Moses, and so God, and it talks about later his nostrils, but we'll get there. So he separates the waters into walls, and then he relinquishes, and it eats everything like that. I think the parallelism, the imagery, the play on the numbers, it's so compact. And it's stuff that you just never really notice, especially the number play. I think that's interesting. If you think those numbers were interesting, it gets better. It's not quite. I think the funniest one so far is chapter 11. That's 10 verses long. But I do think that that's a good place to stop for now because we have. I don't know. Hopefully we'll get to the 10 Commandments today. That would be cool. But I am prepared for whatever happens. So I'm going to go ahead and take a couple minutes of a break, and then I'll see you on the other side. So I'll probably be here in about 3-4 minutes, and we'll just go ahead and continue. So see you soon. All right, guys. So here we are going into chapter 15. This is the big song section of the Song of Moses. And it's interesting to see, and I think it's good to look at it in the Hebrew. So we're going to go ahead and look at it. Sorry, I'm burping. I'm hiccuping. This is my hiccup. Anyway. So, now, I will read the first three. This is the beginning. We're going to start looking at the Hebrew in verse 3. But here. My translation says, Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. So we have verse 3. Now, my translation says, the Lord is a warrior. Yahweh is his name. But do you see the Hebrew? It actually is saying Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. Actually, because of a translation issue, you can have, if you're talking about what does Yahweh mean, he will be a man of war. He will be his name. It's really, really interesting when you look at it that way. It's to me really interesting. When you actually start looking at his name in the sense of he will be or he is or I am that I am, that is pretty cool. So anyway, so that is. Hold on, someone trying to call me. Can't answer right now. So anyway, I lost where I was. Got the call. All right, cool. Verse 5. Oh, I do want to read verse 4 in the interim. Pharaoh's chariots and army he has hurled into the sea.
The finest of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red or Reed Sea. Same thing. The deep waters gushed over them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. So mine says the deep waters.
Does anyone have anything else for verse 5?
The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom like a stone.
Oh, so yours are word for word the same as that translation. It's literal. But the depths is the Hebrew word for chaos. So, so when you said, like, the face of God, the Spirit of God hovered over the deep, it's that word. It is that word. And it's really, so there we go. Anyway. Not to mention, that's interesting. The depths there, I wonder if there's any correlation with Tiamat. I don't know if there is or not. I would have to look that up. See that. I don't know. I could be making false information right now. So this is not something I have researched, but I thought it was interesting that it was very similar to Tiamat. Anyway, so the chaos gushed over them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. All right. Verse 8. So I'll read the ones between. So your right hand, O Lord, is glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, smashes the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow those who rise against you. You unleash your blazing fury. Fire imagery. Huge. It consumes them like straw. Interesting that that's the thing that they had. Anyway, there's an interesting, why would they mention straw? Anyway, there's a whole thing there. But, verse 8. So what does your translation say, Mom? You have a New King James.
And with the blast of your nostrils, the waters were gathered together.
The blast of your nostrils. So remember we talked about how the nose is described as anger. It means anger. And if you have a burning nose, that means you're full of rage. We were just talking about how in the verse beforehand, you unleash your blazing fury. And what does it talk about? The blast of your nostrils were gathered together. You release your blazing fury. And what is it that your nostrils do? Your wrath separated the waters. Like, this is really, really interesting imagery. So, anyway. All right, guys. So you have, at the blast of your breath, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood straight like a wall. In the heart of the sea, the deep waters became hard. The depths, the chaos became hardened. It's almost like it passed away. Anyway, verse 11. Okay. The enemy boasted, I will chase them and catch up with them. I will plunder them and consume them. I will flash my sword. My powerful hand will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. All right, verse 11. So, all right. Who is like you among the gods? Does anyone say gods in plural there? Okay, just making sure. So who is like you among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Okay, so why did I have this one particularly? Who is like you? Yeah, I think it's just clear that it's really cool, like, who is like you? And this is where it's talking about, like, the equation. So, like, it's basically saying that God is the Elohim of Elohim. Then you have, all right, so verse 15, verse 11, 13. With your okay, so you raised your right hand and the earth swallowed our enemies. With your unfailing love, you led the people you have redeemed. In your might, you guide them to your sacred home. So you have so that's 11. Okay, and then 13. Ah, there it is. So this word here, Hebrew lesson. That's really cool. The word that usually translates to whom is not that word. But there is a huge debate on what the meaning of that, of why that word was used in that way. So pronunciation is zu, and this is an ancient reflexive particle, which means whom here. So if you remember God's name, he says, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. So Asher is the normal way of saying that word. For some reason, they inserted zu, which is an old, much older than Asher word. There is a debate, and I will present the debate. I leave it up to you to do what you want. One is that it was written thousands of years ago, that it was written at the time that this song was created, or that it was written to have the feel of it being old, similar to how people write the word thou today to make things sound more, I guess you could say, old-fashioned, or I think you see what I'm saying there, or adding est to certain words, like thou goest, whither thou goest, to sound somewhat old-fashioned. There is a debate. Is this really from that time, or is it actually old-fashioned? So there you go. Anyway, so we got 15, 13. That was what we got there. Just making sure that I didn't miss anything. Yes, cool. 14. Oh. The people will hear and be afraid. They will hear and be afraid. So we're talking about the trembling. So these are talking about the people of other nations will be afraid of God. But it's interesting that using the word, they will heed. They will heed and be afraid. The fear will just terrify them. Anyway, 14. That was 14. So what was we doing with 15? Oh, I already did that. Sorry, I'm kind of losing where I'm at. Okay. 17. I'll read 15 and 16 real quick. The leaders of Edom are terrified. The nobles of Moab tremble. All who live in Canaan melt away. Remember, we didn't know the backstories of Edom. That's from Esau. Moab, which is from Lot's daughters, and then you have Canaan around with Ham. So you have verse 16. In terror and dread fall upon them. The power of your arm makes them lifeless as stone. Until your people pass by, O Lord. Until the people you purchased pass by. This is pretty interesting. So if you remember, we're talking about, I would say, well, actually, no, this is a story. I would use a story that happens later on in Exodus, is that the Lord puts his hand over Moses' face and passes by. And it's interesting here that you're giving an equation with the people passing by and the other nations being afraid. It's like so we're talking about like you're going to be a nation of priests. This is basically talking about how God is elevating these nobodies, these slaves. It's really fascinating. It's a beautiful poem, by the way. So, okay, that's verse 17. You'll plant them on the mountain, of your inheritance, in the place of your own dwelling which you've made. Okay, so why did I write that? Okay, you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, reserved for your own dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands established. Oh, yeah, so you plant, okay, that's what it was. To plant something in further garden. Plant them where? Is on a mountain. And here we're about to enter the cosmic mountain, which is Mount Sinai, and then later on Mount Zion. So it's interesting that you have both mountain and garden imagery here, and that a people is being planted on a mountain. That these people are seen as like divine as sorts. So okay, then you have the Lord will reign forever and ever. That's the end of the poem there. So then you have Miriam
takes out a tambourine and leads the women. And then you have verse 21. And Miriam sang this song, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea." I put something about the number there. Oh, I thought it was interesting that was verse 21, but I can't think of anything why that would be that big of a deal in this one. But it is verse 21, and all verse 21 is a simplification of the song. So that was interesting. Anyway. Wait, I'm just verifying something real quick. Okay, cool. All right, verse 26. He said, "If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God." Oh, what? If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, or in his sight, obeying his commands and keeping all his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on Egypt, for I am the Lord who heals you. So hardy har, I wonder if we're still talking about Garden of Eden imagery here. So if you heed my voice and if you do what I say is good. That's going back to the whole, are you going to take from the fruit of the knowledge of good and bad or good and evil? So it's, and then verse 27, after leaving Marah, the Israelites, we're talking about the word bitter. There it is right there. Marah, the Israelites traveled on to the oasis of, whoa. The oasis of what? So cool. So we're talking about okay. So who is like you among the gods? Remember that in verse 11. Look at these three letters. You have this little kind of looking X, like a long thing, and you have like a weird circle thing. Okay, cool. What does verse 27 say? The wilderness of... We got that X, got that thing. Oh, and this is another version of the same circle-like letter. The M in Hebrew has two shapes. So do four other letters. But anyway, so yeah, and they came to Elim. Interesting name for a place. So, and there were 2 and 10 wells. How many? 12. That's interesting. Of water. And how many palm trees? 70. I mean, I'm not. And what's the word for palm tree? Tamar. And they just came from the land. They just came from bitterness. So they camped there by the waters. So this is interesting imagery coming here. So they came to, anyway, it says after leaving Marah, the Israelites traveled on to the oasis of gods, essentially. To the oasis of God. An oasis of gods where they found 12 springs and 70 palm trees. They camped there beside the water. I wonder if we're talking in any way, shape, or form about any sort of garden. Just say it. And so anyway, and I think that's it with that one. All right. So chapter 16. So they traveled from the place of the God. All right, so the place of God, and came. So all the sons of Israel came to where? The wilderness of what? No, don't think of this as sin as in like our version of sin.
So this is the S, and this is a long form of N. The actual normal N, let me find it if I can find it anywhere. Oh, there it is. See how it's kind of like a backwards Z, kind of, sort of? That's the normal N, and this is the final N, okay? So you have SN. So remember, this circle shape and that weird backwards C shape. So they went to the wilderness of sin. Now let's get into the word for Sinai. Oh, look at that! Huh. And what's the word for bush? If any, let's go ahead and go Exodus 3 interlinear. What's the word for bush? Oh, well, look at that. So there is definitely a lot of wordplay happening here. If you didn't think that the previous verse talking about like the place going to, they're leaving bitterness, Mara, and then they come to the palm trees, Tamar, like then you have like the then how many numbers are going on with the springs and all that stuff, and then they leave the oasis of God. Well, it's actually just called Alim. And then they go into the wilderness of this word that could also mean the have to do with Sinai, or something having to do with the bush that was not consumed. I think it was the word consumed also had the no, that was different. Anyway, wait, no, okay, we're good. Okay, so I think you're saying what I'm saying, seeing what I am seeing. So between Elim and Mount Sinai, we already talked about that. Okay, cool. Hold on. All right, verse 7. Oh, so they arrived there, sorry, on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. Cool. And then verse 7. In the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. By the way, glory here is talking about his great heaviness, majesty. Like, you're gonna kind of be taken away here. But anyway, so in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. What we have done, what have we done that you should complain about us? Then Moses added, the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us. I thought it was interesting how he goes, what have we done? Like, you're the ones that are going, what you're really doing is not against us, it's against the Lord. But it's interesting that even God, hearing these complaints, does bestow them with wonderful blessing. It's like, think about, like, and we're talking about the overbearing parent concept. Think of it though, like a parent would be like, well, if you really, really want to like give something to your kid because you do want to make them happy, that's one thing. But if you keep doing it in that whole aspect, that's a different thing. And I think here it was just he wanted to bless them with an overwhelming blessing. It quite clearly says how much God wants to bless us, or at least his children at that point. So, and actually everyone, but that's besides the point. All right. So, 15, verse 15, and I am pulling out the interlinear on this one. Verse 15. Okay. So, we're talking about manna. What does manna mean?
What's that?
What's the word for manna in Hebrew? Just say the word. You think it's manna? It's not.
What is it?
Mon. That's all it is. It's funny. I thought it was interesting that it's not manna, what you think it would be. It's just that. Mon. Now, in modern Hebrew, they would say mon. But it's mon. And who does not have anything having to do with it, because when they say what they named it later, which is in verse 31, wait a second, that's in verse 31. Mon. They called it mon. So I think it's fascinating that it came across over the years as manna. So it's mon. And so we should, I don't know, I think it's cool. So they came to call it, what mon actually means is, huh? What? So it's really fascinating. So it became manna over the years. But all they're really saying is, what? So it's not even what is this. It's just what? So anyway. Okay. Oh. Verse 32. So,
even in the English version, then Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Fill a 2-quart container with manna, or mon, or what? Fill a 2-quart container with what? To preserve it for your descendants. Then later generations will be able to see the food I gave you in the wilderness when I set you free from Egypt."
Okay, so where did this manna go later?
Yeah.
Could they see that? I think it's interesting. It actually says at the end of the chapter that, like, it was in the ark. It's at the end. It says, like, this eventually went inside the ark. Where was that?
Yeah, in verse 34, placed in the Ark of the Covenant.
So fascinating. You're like, this will be a sign for all the generations to see. It was locked in an ark. So anyway, okay, guys, let's go ahead and. All right, so verse 32, and we have, all right, 17, verse 1. Okay, so verse 1, verses 1, 2, 3. Oh, no, I actually want to read chapter 16, verses 1 to 3 first, then 17, 1 to 3.
16, 1 to 3. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed to the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There, too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There, we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Remember that God gives them meat and bread later. But now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. 17, verse 1 to 3. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they came to Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. "Quiet," Moses replied. "Why are you complaining against me, and why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children and our livestock with thirst?"
So it's interesting, it's very parallel there. It's very similar wording.
And then you have verses 14 to 16.
And so this is interesting that they have a battle. So remember the Lord said, I don't want them to battle those other people. But they did have a small battle here, where it says, after the victory, the Lord instructed Moses, write this down on a scroll as a permanent reminder, and read it aloud to Joshua. I will erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Quick thing. So this is God using Israel as a means to instill divine judgment. He later talks, there's sections in the Bible where it basically says that he uses the language of war, which the people know so well, to get the point across that he is Yahweh. And by the way, it's interesting here that when it says, write this down on a scroll, this is the first time in all of Scripture that you actually have it being said, this is what should be written down. Like, so this is the first time it's mentioned in the Bible that that Scripture is being written. So it's really cool. So this is where who would have thought that all the way in Exodus that records this? Yep, that's where the first instance of writing Scripture comes from. Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. Once again, using a people group as a means to show the other people groups of the time that this God is God, like the God. The God. Okay.
he said, they have raised their fist against the Lord's throne, so now the Lord will be at war with Amalek generation after generation. Lifted up to the Lord's throne. Yeah, so their hands have been lifted up to the Lord's throne is another way of saying that, which is interesting that they were talking about, like, battle, trying to get to the heaven. It's cool. All right, chapter 18, verse 4. We'll start with verse 4. Okay, his second son was named Eliezer, which means my God is helper. My God is a helper is how you would translate that, which is interesting. We talked about the word for helper, and the first helper is Eve. So, okay, and actually the only other helper. So, 17. Ha 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 ha. You're supposed to wink, nod, and giggle in verse 17. So, what does Jethro say? This is great. Not good. Usually, when you have someone saying this is good or this is bad, this is them defining things on their own terms. This is an exception. So this is not good. So this is quite literally saying what God said about Adam. It's not good for Adam to be without a partner. So this is not good. Moses' father-in-law explains, you're going to wear yourself out. So now notice what happens in verse, but as it goes on, you can tell that Jethro is coming from a place of supplication. When you have, he says, may it be pleasing in the Lord's sight. May this go about in a way that God pleases. If God says yes to my suggestion, essentially, then yeah, listen to what I'm saying to you. So it's interesting that the tables are slightly turned here. So verse 19, now listen to me, and let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing the disputes to him. Verse 21, but select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Okay, so this is the first definition of what it means to be a judge in Israelite culture. It's not that you have to have an entire law code memorized. All it is that you're of good esteem and do not like bribes. That you are, what does it say? That fear God and don't take bribes. That makes you a worthy candidate. This will come into play later when we have a discussion. Because we're almost there, just a couple chapters. So I don't know if we'll get there tonight, but anyway. So then you have, oh my goodness, everyone's calling. In the last 10 minutes, I got calls from 4 different and completely unrelated individuals. But anyway, so that's really interesting. So you have chapter 18. Okay, 21. Oh yeah, verses 23 to 24. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. Moses, notice that it's verse 24. Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed his suggestion. But in the last verse it says, if you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so. So like it has to be both conditions to be met. Both conditions have to be met, and then things will go well for you. And it did. So at least to an extent. So chapter 19, verses 5 to 6. Okay, so this is when the Lord reveals himself, like at Sinai. This is huge. The entire mountain trembles. It's like this weird steam cloud thing comes down. And it's interesting too that it's like, I wonder if the mountain is being consumed, but it looks like it's on fire. Wonder if there's any correlation there.
Oh, by the way, remember how the word bush and the word Sinai have exactly the same letters? Huh. So, anyway. So, verses 5 to 6. Now, if you will obey me, it actually says if you will listen, if you will heed my voice. If you listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me. Do you remember his commission in the first chapter is that he tells humanity that go ahead, rule and subdue this earth. But here he's saying the earth belongs to me. It doesn't quite belong to all of you yet. It's like that. There's that still bit of a distance. They're not quite at the Eden state yet. So anyway, for all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests. So anyway, my holy nation. Holy here is definitely saying my unique, my set apart, the one that's completely different. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. So they're going to be a kingdom of priests. Once again, this is how they could intercede. So Moses is interceding for Israel. Interceding and pleading to God on Israel's behalf. But Israel had every right as well to plead to God on every other nation's behalf. I wonder what Christians have as well when we are considered the second version of this. This is really cool stuff. So, all right. So, verse 11. Be sure they are ready on the third day. Be sure they're ready on the third day. For on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. It's interesting. The complete opposite happens with Jesus. He's gone for 3 days and then he rises. So instead of God coming down, you have Jesus coming up. It's really that's interesting parallel. Or actually, you know what I mean. There's like a interesting contrast being done there. But verse 16. On the morning of the third day, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came down on the mountain. There was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn, and all the people trembled. I don't know if anyone's noticed this before. You could have, but it doesn't say where the blasting of the ram's horn came from. It's like the people didn't. It was kind of like in the air. It was kind of like it just happened. And it's interesting how Revelation talks about the trumpet sounding. So this is definitely, it's like that would be freaky when you hear this really crazy trumpet sound and you have no idea what's really coming from. That would terrify pretty much anyone. And then you have like the mountain shaking and like the steam rolling down, like a volcano, really. But anyway, it's yeah, I can imagine why they'd be pretty terrified. All right, so think of Sinai and think of the word for bush having the same letters here. Ready? Verse 18. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. I'm sorry, that is really freaky. Anyway, verses 21 to 25. And there's also a section there. I don't know if I actually wrote down the verse, but it is saying that it was not consumed, which is hardy hard. Anyway, verses 21 to 25. So, then the Lord told Moses, go back down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die. They will die. Even the priests who regularly come near to the Lord. Oh, by the way, the word to come near, to draw near, to approach, that is a very common imagery, very common wording for what happens when, it's very common wording for what happens when, how do I describe it? So priests will come near You also have the Lord calling the people to draw near. That's another thing. You have like prophets saying, draw near to the Lord. But one thing about Jesus is that he announces that the kingdom has So we're talking about how Jesus is very often the opposite of the imagery. So God comes down on the third day. Jesus rises up on the third day. Another thing is like how he says for the people to come near, or the priests to come near. Here it's the kingdom has come near with Jesus. So it's like there's a lot of opposite clashing going on, because it's like, yeah, Jesus had like with like the whole Jesus story, God has had enough with people failing to draw near, so he just tears down that veil anyway and approaches head on, which is awesome and amazing because of his grace. But anyway, okay, so 22. Oh yeah. But Lord, Moses protested, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai. You already warned us. You told me to mark off a boundary all around the mountains and set apart as holy. I don't think God forgot. So I think he's like, oh yeah, that's right. Right. So it's interesting. God actually says this 3 times. I think it might be possible that he said it more, but I caught 3 times where he's like, don't let them come up. He says it several times at least. So at least those 3 few times. But the Lord said, go down and bring Aaron back up with you. In the meantime, do not let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord. So it's like you didn't even pay attention to what Moses just said. It's like you already had me set this place off. And he says it again. I just think it's funny. I'm just laughing with this one. Don't let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord, or he'll break out and destroy them. But Moses went down to the people and told them what the Lord had said. So that's just funny to me. All right. I don't know if we can get through all of them. But here we is. So I will at least start it. Chapter 20. The big one. The great one. The 10 Commandments. Do you remember that there were 7 words in Hebrew that began the first chapter of Genesis? Look at this. So this has no meaning. And God spoke all these words, saying, and then here it goes. So this is just really, 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 really cool. All right, so I am the Lord your God, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Verse 3. How many words are in verse 3? Quite clearly 7. You shall have no other gods before me. And what this actually says, the same meaning as before, it just means that are in my face. You will not have anyone in my face. So no other gods will you have in my face or on par with me. It's interesting that verse 3 has, talking about God, 7 words. Then you have, actually my NLT translation does it really well too. You must not have any other God but me. That's really cool too. No other God but me. You will not have any other. 7, verse 7. Count. So 7 count the number. Okay, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You shall not take the name of Yahweh in vain. Your God in vain. Isn't this really cool? So you have verse 1, verse 3, and verse 7 begin with 7-word phrases. Now, of course, 7 extends. But come on, the actual commandment is 7 words long in verse 7. And the word for take here, it does mean like don't bear it, don't carry it. So don't represent me falsely. Don't let others look at you and say, oh, you are of Yahweh, that's you. like you are one of his. That's an important meaning there. All right, so that's verse 7. Verse 9. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, but what is he talking about? 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And that is said in 6 words. I wonder if this is intentional. All right, guys, let's keep going here. Verse 11 at the very end. Okay, so the entire verse 11.
It's pretty large. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy.
Do you remember Genesis, beginning of Genesis 2? Remember we had a 21-word phrase. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Oh, wait, no, where was that? There was something about, I forget exactly what it was. I presented this really, really early on, but it had something to do with blessing the day, and I think it was 21 words, or was it 14? But I'll have to look it up again. I remember it was a weird section that it began on. But I can reference it later. If you want, it's definitely in, I think, the 2nd week. But it's almost exactly the same wording. And he rested on the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes! And he rested on the 7th day from all the work he had done. That's it. And then it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there we go. It ended God on the day 7th, his work which he had done. And he rested on the 7th day from all the work he had done. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because he rested. Anyway, 1, 2, 3. There's something about the very ending here as well that does exactly the same thing. But you see what I'm saying here, right? So what happens at the end of 11? Therefore, blessed Yahweh, the day. Oh, what? How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. And then you have. I don't think this one has anything. Yeah, this one doesn't have anything, but right here it does. Therefore, beginning like again, this is considered one word here. So therefore, blessed Yahweh blessed the 7th day and consecrated. So, all right, a couple more things. Verse 11, yeah, and count. Okay, verse 17. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Let's think of the entire narrative of Genesis. Do we ever have a story of a wife being coveted, or of some woman being coveted? Absolutely. We were talking about Pharaoh and Abimelech. A male or a female servant. Yeah, remember like the wives strike? How about like an ox or a donkey? We definitely have it over livestock. Like when we're talking about Laban and stuff like that, and the possessions that are gathered. Or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. These people have better things than we have. That's the last commandment, and this is talking about like what you desire. The word covet is the word for like strong desire. You should not covet your neighbor's house. You should not covet your neighbor's wife. Like think about it. What is Genesis all about? Is people coveting things, but yet God using these covetous people to continue this line forward. That to me is just really cool. Then you have. Verse 19, and they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but don't let God speak directly to us or we will die. It's I mean, come on. I honestly can understand that, though, because if you were in that situation and that were to happen right in front of your face, yeah, I could actually see why they would say something like that. So I actually don't blame them as far as that's concerned. But, so, in verse 23, it says, remember you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. So this is like a repetition of what was already said within the body of the Ten Commandments, right? Build for me an altar made of what? Remember that word? Where did Adam come from? Into dust you shall return. Into the there are two words. There's one word for dust. There's one word for earth, and this is a play on words here. So you're going to make an altar of this stuff here, adolmo. Now think about it. You have an altar of you have an altar of earth. Let's just say this just earth, right? Why earth? And why will you stack? And you can't even shape a stone incorrectly. It goes all the way until verse 26. You can't. You have to use uncut stones. Don't shape the stones with a tool. That would make the altar unfit for holy use. And don't approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness. We talked about this before. All these images from the Garden of Eden are coming back, and they are making an altar of the earth where they came from. This is pretty interesting stuff here. The altar of sacrifice. It's pretty cool. So I think that's what we can talk about there. But oh my goodness, let me see if I missed anything. I think that's what we'll end for today. I think that'll be a pretty solid ending for today. I don't have actually that much left in Exodus, just to tell you the truth, but it can last. It'll be pretty quickly done, and then we'll head into Numbers. So there we go, guys. Any questions or anything like that before we close things out?
No questions, but it's just amazing to see that the way numbers work. And I haven't seen the extent of that before as what you have shown us tonight. So thank you.
I remember talking to you about that beforehand. It's like it blows my mind, the number play here. I remember, I think 2 weeks ago we started this, and I'm like, "Do you think we looked at number plays before?" We just getting started. So
yeah, it's all over tonight.
What?
It's all over every chapter tonight. So.
Yeah, everywhere. It's so in your face. And come on, it's like on the and then like in chapter 20 with the commandments, you have don't take the Lord's name in vain. 7 words. Like don't, I am the Lord your God. 7 words. Like on the 7th day, it was consecrated. 7 words. So anyway. All right. So I think any other things before we close out?
I think it's interesting that it was the commandments pertaining to our relationship to God that started with 7 words, and then the rest were just how you deal with people.
Yeah, it really is
different. And one more thing.
Yes, please.
In chapter 16, verse 36, speaking of numbers, it says, now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. And I was like, well, I'm glad they cleared that up.
16 what?
Wondering all along.
It was 16 what?
No, now an omer is 1/10.
16 what?
Chapter 6, last verse in 16, 36.
The container used to measure the manna was an omer, which was about 1/10 of an ephah. It held about 2 quarts.
It's 2 quarts.
2 quarts.
Mine doesn't say that. It just says, I'm glad they cleared that.
They really made that one super clear. So, I am super. This has been an honor. I am really looking forward to where things are going to go from here. But
And I think also too, when you look at the whole like the plagues and the wonders and all the stuff put together, it's like this is why I like the concept of us looking at it from the scribes' perspective, because this would have popped out in their face, and I'm sure they saw more than we do today. So what I'm saying is, like, there has to be crazy amounts of stuff going on in Scripture. So
yes, I think if you're a native Hebrew speaker, that it would pop out to you.
Yeah, I would say a lot of them, I've heard that there's difficulty. That's a totally different subject. But the difference between biblical and modern Hebrew has made it so that way people can read the scriptures, but it still has lost a lot of its nuance.
No, I mean the original, the ancient Hebrew. If you
you mean back then?
Back then,
yeah,
it was in your
100%. Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
That's what I meant. That the Hebrew of that time, it was in their face.
Yeah, and then even with modern Hebrew, it's still a lot in their face, but it's been so Europeanized, the language today. That really, 2 seconds past. Okay, so when Hebrew basically died as a language, and in the 1800s there was a revival effort that went down. And so it's the only successfully revitalized language in the world. It actually did pretty much die. It was only used in liturgical use. And so they made it alive again by putting it inside of like households and allowing children to speak it as a first language. But because the families that started this were from Europe, the language very quickly became Europeanized. And so a lot of these verbal things that like Arabic still has today, like the weird nuances that verbs have been lost in Hebrew to the more Europeanized verbal system. So stuff like that. So what I'm saying is they can still read the scriptures, but even they have to really think about things at times. So that's modern version. I'm not talking ancient. So anyway, that's all I got. I think that's pretty good to just throw him into his hands on that one. So all right, Father, here we are. Like this it's crazy. Oh, I just even thought of another thing. How many chapters is Genesis? Is 50. How many chapters into Exodus before we get to the Ten Commandments? 20. What's 50 plus 20? So like, this is in our face, this stuff. It's crazy. I never even thought of that until just now, that whole 70 right there. But that to me is like, here we are, just marveling at how supremely intricate the scripture is. This is truly of the Elohim. This is truly of you. Yeah, this is some like the magician said in Egypt. This is beyond us, and here we are, just marveling at these things. We thank you for having allowed us to, at least having opened our eyes to how you see things. That's just a little bit in this regard. We come to you with open arms and just grabbing hold of you. I am just blown away by what has been revealed to me in just the past 2 years, not even 2 years. So, Father, thank you for guiding us on this journey and keeping us active and really wanting to come together and study your word. It's all in your hands. We come to you so gladly, and we just ask your hand of grace on everyone as we go about our ways. Thank you. And come to you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 All right.